So with that, we find ourselves here about time, and we'll be presenting to you care and feeding of HSMs, key management hard mode, and I will agree with you there, by a former colleague of mine, Nick Pelis.
Okay. Thank you all very much. Thank you, Jeremy. I'm actually utterly shocked that there are this many people in this room here. So we're gonna talk about a lot of stuff today. But before we get started, I'll give you a quick little intro on myself. My name is Nick. I work in the security department at Verkada. I've always been interested in embedded systems and the security of embedded systems. And I don't know how it happened, but at some point in my career, I got involved with HSMs. It was not intentional, but here I am today. And I hope to share some of these war stories and lessons learned with you during our time together. So more often than not, we as security practitioners deal with a number of problems, and the solution to some of those problems is cryptography, right? You want to send all your cryptocurrency to some scammers in a foreign country. What's the solution? Cryptography. You want to buy some illicit products off of some illicit market. What's the solution? Cryptography. You want to send a message over the internet and not have the NSA listen to you. That's cryptography. So when we talk about cryptography, the thing we need to keep in mind is that most of the problems involve always have a key in play. So most of us are familiar with this type of problem. We have Alice on the left. Alice wants to send a message to Bob, but Alice is afraid that Eve in the middle is going to read that message or potentially modify it. So what's Alice going to do? She's going to take that message, she's going to encrypt it, perhaps with her favorite email encryption client like GPG, and all seems well, right? It seems like we've solved the problem, but actually we haven't, because we've just traded the problem of the eavesdropping for the problem of what to do with the key. So what do we do with the key? Well, we could ask around on the internet, we could ask our favorite AI LLM assistant, and it gives some advice that sounds pretty good on the surface, right? Always use trusted cryptographic libraries. Yeah, most of us are told it's not a good idea to roll your own cryptographic library. Choose appropriate key lengths. Yeah, that sounds also like a good solution. And then right down there, use hardware security modules. More on that in a little bit. But, ultimately what we're getting to here is a discussion about key management. So you do some more research on the internet. Eventually you'll come across this document from NIST, NIST SP 857. This is the recommendation for key management. And like many NIST documents, this one is both very comprehensive and not specific. So you have to read between the lines to understand what it actually means for the problem you're trying to solve. But if you go in there and you read it at kind of like a high level, there's some really good advice. And so SP 857 is going to tell you about the different types of cryptographic keys that are available, right? You have keys for encryption, keys for signing things, you have key encryption keys. There's probably the most important lesson in this document, which is key usage, meaning use one key for one purpose. Why do we do that? Well, we want to minimize the blast radius. If you have a single key that you use for encrypting the data on your, say, on your workstation, and that's also the key you use to encrypt all your customer data in the cloud, it would be really bad if that key got compromised somehow. So you want to limit the blast radius there. It talks about terms like crypto period, which is that you want to use that key for the shortest amount of time possible. Makes sense. Security strength, if keys are longer, then they can stick around for a longer period of time. Stronger keys are better. Archive and recovery, if we lose that key, maybe we want the ability to bring it back. And revocation, what do we do if that key gets compromised somehow? And it sounds complicated to think about all of this stuff, especially if you're just reading this NIST technical document, which is difficult to read, but ultimately the concepts are quite similar, or quite simple to grasp. If you think about cryptographic keys in terms of your house key, right? If you have a key on your house that has a single pin on the tumbler, that's not going to be as strong of a key with the lock that has 7 or 8 pins, and the lock picking lawyer takes more than 60 seconds to break in it. That's probably a better key. If you have one key for every single lock on your house, and it opens all of them equally, well, that's not quite as good as if you have a single key for a single lock, because if you compromise one key for all locks, then that key's gone and anybody can get into any door in your house. So something to keep in mind as you read through this. And so now let's walk through some examples now that we've talked a little bit about SP 857, and let's think about how we view keys and key management. So most of us, you go to a website, go to your favorite website, BSidesSF.org, you click the little box in the web browser, and it's going to tell you that this is an HTTPS connection, it's secure. And what is it about this connection that makes it secure? Well, that comes down to the TLS handshake. So in TLS 1.3, the whole sequence, the whole dance of events begins on the client side. The client will generate an ephemeral key pair and send that over to the server, the public key. The server will also generate an ephemeral key pair and send its public key to the client, along with a certificate and some identifying metadata. Now, with each side having the other side's public key, we can do a key derivations, typically a Diffie-Hellman key exchange, and both sides can derive a session key. And at the end of this, in number 4, what we have is a session key that encrypts all the application data, the HTTP messages, and that's used effectively to provide the cryptography of the session. So based on that, what can we say about that session key, right? Well, the crypto period, the length of time for which the key is valid, is short because those keys are thrown away at the end of the session. The security strength of that key, well, it's nominal. It's chosen by the specific cipher suite, but if you're using TLS 1.3, let's say it's strong enough, it's good. What about key revocation? Well, compromise of that session key is only going to leak the data for that session. What about archive and recovery? Well, again, this is just a session key for a single session. If you lose that key, then you just revisit the website. It's not a big deal. And what about the cost to replace that key? Well, your browser invented it on the fly. It's an ephemerally generated key. So you can just generate another one. There's no cost to replace it. And what about auditing? If somebody gets a hold of that key and, do we need to worry about that? It's not really applicable in this case. In other words, by setting the crypto period to a very short amount of time, we've kind of sidestepped a lot of these thorny key management issues, right? But what happens if you can't always do that? So what do we do with the session key at the end of the session? We throw it away. But what if you can't do that because you need that key around for a very long time? So let's talk about another example here. IoT device. So most of us have these in our houses, our buildings, our offices. Most of you here in this room today have one in your pocket. There's some in this theater room. And these IoT devices last for a very long time. They could be installed in buildings, they could be in the ceilings, they could be in the air ducts, they could be monitoring things in your house. Wherever they're located, they're going to be there for a long time. And so most IoT devices implement a feature called Secure Boot. And the whole purpose of Secure Boot is just a firmware validation feature to ensure that the device is booting legitimate authorized firmware instead of a botnet code like we saw with the Mirai botnet in 2016, 2017. And the way that this works is pretty straightforward. So there's a lot of boxes here, but the thing you need to understand is that at the beginnings of this system, there is a public-private key pair that is used to protect the very first piece of code that loads. So there's this boot ROM private key, that's the box in red, and then there's the private key in the box in red, and then the corresponding public key, which is typically stored in write-once memory on the chip. It might be a hash of the public key, but it's write-once memory, and so it's programmed in there when the device is manufactured. Then when the device comes out of power on reset, that public key is used to validate the first piece of code that loads, that's the shim. The shim contains a public key of the next piece of code that loads, that's ATF or ARM Trusted Firmware, and this process continues down and down the chain until we have a chain of trust. The system is up and running, and now we know that our IoT device is running legitimate firmware that we meant to put on there. But we still have a key that we need to manage here. And if we look at this red box here, right, this is a private key for the firmware on this device. This device is going to be out in the field for who knows how long, years, maybe decades. So we can't just throw it away like we could with the session key. We have to do something with it. So what can we say about this ROM private key? Well, first of all, the crypto period we know is long, right? It's going to be out there forever. The session strength, well, that's determined by whatever cryptographic algorithm is used by the chipset, but let's just say the security strength is 112, 128 bits, so we'll say it's fine for now. What about key revocation? Well, remember, we had to write that public key into write-once memory. It is possible on many IoT devices to revoke that key if it gets compromised, but it's not an easy process. Write-once memory is usually very limited in size, maybe hundreds to maybe 1,000 or a few thousand bits. So you don't have a lot of opportunities to rewrite that key, right? So in other words, we don't want to revoke that key if we can at all avoid it. What about archiving and recovery? Well, that seems very important in this context. If we lose that private key, that's going to block future software upgrades from getting out to that device. If you're a IoT device manufacturer, you lose the ability to update your devices in the field. That seems really bad. What about the cost to replace that key? If we lose it, then we might have to recall every single device we've shipped if we're that manufacturer. And that could be cost prohibitive. That could bankrupt the company. And then what about auditing? Well, I mean, you think about it, right? Let's say you're the operator of a fleet of devices, say 10 million devices all around the world, in businesses and homes and wherever. It's very important that those devices are running firmware that you want them to run, right? If they get infected with malware, that would be really bad. So we want to have a lot of auditing. We want to protect this key for a very long time. We need to be able to back up and recover it. Okay, so we need something for this ROM private key. So how should we protect it? How should we protect it? Well, let's think about our options here. If we just leave it on a laptop, that's great because anytime somebody needs it, they can just compile it and use it. But then, the laptop could die or it could get stolen. We could check it into Git, and then you're not just linked to a single laptop. All your developers can access that key whenever they need it. And that's kind of nice and convenient. But then again, once it goes into Git, you're never, ever deleting it. Or that GitHub repo could get leaked to the internet, which actually happened with the UEFI secure boot keys very recently. Okay, so what are some other options here? We could be super paranoid and write that private key down on a piece of paper. That's nice because it's offline. There's actually a number of crypto exchanges that use this. But then, you can copy pieces of paper. They tend to break down and yellow and degrade over time. And there's really no auditing around them, so that doesn't sound like a good solution. What if we put it on a USB stick? Well, somebody could steal the USB stick. But what are other options here? Well, we could use a cloud service provider's key management service. That sounds really nice. Somebody else gets to deal with the availability problem, the backups, the restores. We get whatever identity access management the cloud provider has, so you get that for free. But then again, basically, you're renting someone else's equipment. So, over time, that cost is going to increase. What happens if, 5 years in the future, you decide to change cloud service providers? Maybe there's some functionality that you need that isn't there or gets taken away or moved over time. So then, what's the grand solution here? If we listen to what Claude told us earlier, use an HSM, use a hardware security module. And so with that, you own your whole key management story. That's great, but you're signing up for a lot when you decide to operate an HSM, which we'll talk about here now. So HSMs, hardware security modules. What these are purpose-built physical computers that are designed to do one thing, which is store and manage and create and modify cryptographic keys. So you can buy them in very different form factors. YubiKey has one the size of your thumb. They come in little handheld units that look like little tablet computers. They have them in PCI form factor or rack mount systems. The cost is as much money as you want to spend on it. So the cheap ones are like $600. The more expensive ones can be over 150 grand. How you interact with them, so you could do a username and a password, or you could use a smart card. And so there are many different options out there. And so you have to really sort through these to figure out what's going to work best for you. Now, let's say you're crazy and you decide to operate an on-premises HSM. Well, why would you do this? Well, like we talked about, maybe you have some high-value keys. If those are lost or leaked, then that's going to completely disrupt your company or your operations. Or maybe you don't need access to those keys frequently. Well, that's nice because then you can keep those keys offline. You basically sidestep a whole portion of your threat model when the keys are not connected to the internet. That actually makes a lot of things a whole bunch easier at the expense of an operational nightmare. Maybe you want to keep them under your physical control. Like, I know my keys are here because they're over there in that box, right over there in the corner. And then maybe you're willing to do this because you have the patience to deal with PKCS 11. So PKCS 11 is a standard put out by this group called OASIS, and it is an interoperability standard for telling you how you can work with different HSMs. And everything is interoperable and everything works magically. It's a lie. It is a lie. You cannot port your key between different HSM vendors. You cannot port your keys from an HSM vendor to a cloud, to like AWS or Azure. Once you choose a path, you are locked in for life. And so you need to keep that in mind if you're going to go down this route. The other thing that's important to know about PKCS 11 is that it defines a library interface in the C programming language. And so most people are not writing production C code these days. Well, that's fine. You do some search on GitHub. Maybe you find some PKCS 11 bindings that are written in Go, or you find an engine that works in OpenSSL. And every time you go through one of these layers of software, you lose information. It's like taking a JPEG and exporting it to a JPEG and a JPEG and a JPEG, and eventually you're like losing information in here. And you lose some of the core functionality that brought you to the HSM in the first place that you chose, right? Maybe you really want the ability to do smart card authentication, but the library that you've chosen, because you're going through 7 layers of indirection, doesn't support that. So just a bit of warning about PKCS 11. The other thing you're going to have to deal with if you operate HSMs is a key management ceremony. So there's a lot of prior art, which we'll mention briefly here, but mostly a key management ceremony is just a procedure where you are creating, distributing, authorizing cryptographic keys. It's usually attended by multiple people at the same time. And the reason for that is you want to reduce collusion, you want to reduce insider threats. And fundamentally, at the end of this, you have like a chain of custody. Like, these people were here and they created this cryptographic key, and because they all witnessed it, that makes it valid and true. And so if you're interested in creating your own cryptographic key ceremony, there's a lot of stuff you can read about this online. Probably the most famous and public example is the DNSSEC root zone key signing key ceremony. So that they do this 4 times a year to update the DNSSEC root zone. It's live streamed. If you ask them nicely, you can go attend it in person. There's also a Radiolab episode that talks about Zcash. I highly recommend listening to that if you've got half an hour. And then there's also some other standards and blog posts out there. But fundamentally, you have to create your own key ceremony if you're going to operate an HSM. That just comes with part and parcel of operating one of these things. So early in the days when I was first learning about HSMs, it's like something you just had on your desk, right? Like, I work in hardware, so people have development prototyping boards, and so I was like, oh yeah, you're gonna do some setup work with the HSM. Go ahead. Why don't you borrow this unit for the weekend? And so they were like really close to getting it working. They stayed late. They're trying to get everything done, and then like they left for 2 weeks. And this unit is like $15,000. And so the next week, we're like running around the office in a panic search. Where's the HSM? And like, there were a lot of questions raised. Well, did they take it with them? Did they go on vacation? Like, what's going on? And so fundamentally, we were like, okay, we don't trust anything in that HSM anymore. Let's just zeroize it and start over from scratch. So the takeaway there is like, control the equipment. After that, we put the HSMs and all the smart cards in like an access control place. So we put it in a safe, and then the safe is in another room. And so there's like a separation of responsibilities between who can access the safe and who can use the keys. And so the other thing you need to keep in mind with when you're operating HSMs is how the segmentation of roles occurs. So when you authenticate to an HSM, you're not authenticating as you, a user, you're authenticating as a role. And in the HSM world, according to the PKCS 11 standard, there's different users that can perform different types of operations. So sort of the granddaddy of them all is the security officer. They can administer the HSM, they can do backups, and then they can also instantiate and modify other users. You've got the crypto officer. They can create other keys, they can use them, they can destroy them, and then sort of like the lowest user on the totem pole is the crypto user. And then like how you choose to set these up for your specific circumstances is 100% up to you. But the thing you need to remember is that ultimately it's like people operating these things and people make mistakes. So one time I had this situation where I had to reset the role for the crypto officer because they forgot their PIN. And to do that, then you have to authenticate as security officer to reset the crypto officer role. And we had it set up as a 2 of 5 quorum. We'll talk about that shortly. But one of the 2 of us forgot their PIN 3 times in a row. And when you do that, there's nobody higher than the security officer, so the HSM just freaks out and wipes out all the keys. And then we had to go through all the operational hassle of doing an emergency key rotation. In this case, that actually meant pushing out new firmware to the factory to use up one of our few key slots on these IoT devices that these keys were for. So that wasn't very good. So the takeaway from that experience was that people make mistakes all the time. So now when somebody participates in a key ceremony, we say, okay, I'm glad that you know your PIN. I'm glad you have it memorized. I don't care. Please write it down somewhere else. Don't tell me where you wrote it down. Please keep another copy somewhere else. The other thing we do is we operate multiple HSMs in multiple places. So on site, I always have a primary and a hot spare, and I may have a copy of those keys, and I may also have backups off site, and those are just in case like the building burns down or there's an earthquake, California falls off into the ocean, that sort of thing. The other HSM horror story I love to share is the story about the battery. So HSMs are interesting devices in that they keep all of your cryptographic key material in battery-backed SRAM, right? So the idea is like if you lose power, then the battery is the only thing keeping those keys alive. And so that means periodically you have to replace the battery because batteries tend to die over time. So the instructions for doing this are insane. What the manufacturer wants you to do, they give you this little temporary battery holder, right? And you're supposed to take that, you're supposed to take the plug and plug it into P8 there, and then like hold it in the case while with your other hand, you're unscrewing the main battery. You have to pop it out, then put in the replacement and screw it back in. Like, never mind the fact that you chose to put your keys in a $45,000 HSM because they're high value. This is like diffusing a bomb. Like, if you accidentally yank the cable out, then you've lost all your keys. If it falls out of your hand and it grounds against the case, you've lost all your keys. If you install the temporary battery in backwards and mix up the polarity, it's all gone. It's like literally insane that they want you to do this. And so like we had a very similar experience one time. We had an HSM model where you can set it up in such a way that if the HSM thinks it's lost power, or if it thinks it's been touched or modified in any way, it'll go into this tamper state. And so then you have to recover it, right, using some type of other authentication. And on this particular HSM model, it's possible to set it up in such a way that you need a smart card in order to recover the HSM. Well, the implication of that wasn't apparent. So when I set this up the first time, I'm like, okay, great, I have a recovery smart card. 3 months later, I forgot all about it. I overwrote it because I needed it for something else. And then eventually that battery died, and the HSM and its keys were like completely unusable. You cannot like reset it. You have to actually send it back to the manufacturer to get it repaired. It's like completely insane. So like the takeaway here is like, when you see things in the manual that look really enticing, like, hey, you can have a smart card recover the HSM, and you think like, oh, that's a great idea. You need to read that multiple times and think really closely about what the implications of that are. The other thing that I do now as a result of this experience is I always have multiple operational HSMs handy. So then if one of them dies, I can just flip back to another one. And so like that's helped me immeasurable times. The final horror story I want to share with you is that I mentioned earlier how HSMs authenticate according to role and not by user. So what that means is like using Shamir's secret sharing, you can split the role secret, like the crypto officer secret, amongst any number of key share holders. And so then, that's kind of nice because you can say, well, I'm worried about somebody modifying the contents of my HSM, so I always want 2 of 5 or 2 of whatever crypto officers or security officers present. So if somebody wants to modify the HSM, then like there's less collusion risk. But the problem with that assigning these smart cards to people is that eventually they quit. They get sick, they leave groups, they're not interested in doing it anymore. And so eventually you have to recreate the role, which means you have to write a new secret. So we had an experience like this where a new person joined the team and we wanted to rekey the security officer role. So we went from 2 of 4 to 2 of 5. And as we're going through and we're rekeying this role, right, I have everybody in the room in a ceremony and we're like going around round robin. And so one person will go in, they'll reprogram their smart card, then we'll go to the next person, the next person, the next person. And we got to the third person in the set, and then the HSM just threw an error and locked up. And that was really bad because at that point in time, what we were doing was reusing every single person's smart card. So that effectively left things in a state where I had 3 of the 4 original smart cards reprogrammed with the new secret. The HSM was set up for a 2 of 4 quorum. That meant I did not have enough key shares present to authenticate as security officer. So the takeaway from that is like you should always rehearse critical operations on the test HSM. Do not rewrite smart cards that could still be used in production. And always create copies of everything and rotate between the copies because eventually they're going to fail or people are going to fail. So what do we take away from this in conclusion? HSMs are a very serious commitment. If you're going to take this route, only choose it because you have the budget, the staffing, and the patience to see it through. Definitely have backups of everything and have backups of those backups and build a process that is going to accommodate mishaps because they can and will occur. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Nick, for that hilarious set of anecdotes. We'll definitely stay here for questions. So again, the way we do questions, I see one has already landed in here, but just as a reminder, you go to sli.do or you can go to slido.com, get you to the same place. Put in the conference code BSidesSF2025 and Theater 15. We are in the Theater 15 category at least. So with that, this one looks really targeted. This might be a colleague asking a funny question, but let's get with this. How do you design the provisioning process for Verkada Dome series cameras to ensure long-lived ROM private keys remain resilient and easy to audit through their life cycle?
That's a great question.
That's a great question. Hilarious. We'll definitely let some more slide in here. Is that just a planted question, or is there a point in there?
That's a great question, and that's private information. I can't share that.
All right, so that was definitely a colleague egging you on. No worries. If you're particularly shy and you're in Theater 50, I'm not going to do this a whole lot, but you could raise your hand if it's a short question, and I'll ask it directly. But we do want to prioritize people on the streams and possibly in the overflow. Let me look one more time. Okay, we'll go for this one.
So you look really need to kind of optimize your heat. You just need to optimize your in and decrypt the data. How do you sort of solve how do you sort of defend that traditional HSMs these days? I just find the technology really hasn't moved on. We still use the BSidesSF. We couldn't really configure that different API. They think we had it. So what's happening?
Can you repeat the question?
Yeah, so the question talked about how a lot of PKCS11 is effectively legacy technology, and now these days and age we're used to like, you know, how do you authenticate as yourself rather than like having people write PIN numbers around on slips, and like how do I defend that? I don't work for an HSM manufacturer. I think these things are like very difficult to use. I think there's an area here that's ripe for innovation. I also think that the world market for HSMs is not big enough to justify that innovation. And so for those specific use cases where you actually need something like this in place, where the reasons, the business reasons, the risk and everything justify something like an HSM, then you're just kind of left with this technology that's old and difficult to use.
We are unfortunately actually at time and we do have to cut off. Nick will be available definitely for questions out there on the floor. Thank you everyone for attending. That was a great topic. And well, thank you, Nick.